Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started with our next presenter. Very appreciative of him coming on such a short notice. Rob Schultz, he's the Hall County Weed Superintendent, and so he's got some information that he's going to provide about noxious and invasive species. I handed out some materials for you, and then raise your hand if you didn't pick up or grab one of the, I printed off some University of Nebraska Eastern Red Cedar facts and information, and Rachel and I can get that packet. It was some white sheets to hand out. If you need one, we can come by and pick that up. But with further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Rob. So thanks for coming.
All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, this was very short notice. So I do speak a few times at private applicator trainings in Grand Island, and also I'm the Howard County Weed Superintendent. So I do have a few of these made up and added a few things to it this morning. So anyway, I've been Hall County Weed Superintendent for 23 years, quite a while. So I grew up on a farm up in the Caro area. We raise cattle up there, and just getting started in the calving era right now. So and everything. So anyway, I will get started on this. And first of all, I have got a Weeds of the Great Plains book to give away. If anybody can tell me how many noxious weeds there are in the state of Nebraska. So anyway, there are 12 noxious weeds in the state of Nebraska. And so what is a noxious or an invasive plant? An alien species whose introduction does or likely to cause economic and environmental harm or human health. Basically, a plant growing anywhere where you do not want it. A native plant in one state could be invasive in another state. And a plant meeting 6 out of the 9 criteria will be considered as having met the minimum standards to justify recommendation to the Department of Ag. So there's 9 criteria in order to be a noxious weed. A plant has to meet 6 of them. So we just can't pull any weed out of the air and have it become noxious. We get a lot of questions about Palmer amaranth right now becoming noxious weed, and it probably wouldn't meet all the criteria. So anyway, some other invasive plants, eastern red cedar and Russian olive trees, reed canary grass, cattails, locust trees, cutleaf, common teasel, sulfur cinquefoil, houndstone, just some of the invaders. You'll see some invaders in those brochures that I handed out also, some things that we're looking for and to be on the watch out for. So why should I really care if I'm a farmer or rancher? Noxious and invasive species should be a concern to all farmers and ranchers and landowners. Reduce yields in crops and pastures and reduce the value of the land. And so I know this is probably hard to see, but at least maybe you can see the yellowness there in the picture. That's leafy spurge. I took that a number of years ago when I went up to North Dakota to collect leafy spurge beetles. Didn't think there was much of a leafy spurge problem up there when I went up there, and then we come up over the hill and it was a lot of yellow. And so there were acres and acres of pasture up there that they were not able to graze because of the leafy spurge. It was so bad. They had some biocontrol, and the bugs really helped out, lowered the infestation levels, and the grazing was able to come back. So early detection, rapid response, most effective way to manage weeds. So if you find a small infestation, you're going to want to get after it early. That's the same way with a few dandelions in your yard. You want to go out and get rid of those when you can get them in a small infestation. You let them go, you're going to have a whole yard full of dandelions. So that's the way it is with musk thistle or leafy spurge, or as we'll get into it in a little bit, eastern red cedar trees. You got 5 or 10 out there, go get those. Otherwise, there'll be 100 out there in a few years. So stay after them. Early detection saves you a lot of time and money. So be able to complete musk thistle there that just took over the small little horse pasture that the guy had. So, which it's no longer now. The pivot goes completely around. So, if you get an EC 130, the Guide for Weed Management, that's a very good guide to get your hands on if you can. It has the noxious weed section in it. It has troublesome weeds and woody plants in there. Gives you some control recommendations and things like that. So a very good publication to get your hands on. So we'll just skim through these noxious weeds here a little bit and give you a little bit of an overview. You've got them there in your brochures, but some pictures and a little bit of control recommendations. Leafy spurge, sorry about that. It blooms yellow in May and June, white milky sap inside. So if you break a piece of it off, white milky sap. So sometimes you'll see some mustards or a few other yellow flowers growing in the springtime. You want to break those open. I'll bet they won't have white milky sap in it, where this one does. Tordon in the fall, grassland in the spring. There's a newer product out called Method. Works on right-of-ways, utilities, non-grazed areas. Was on a Corteva Zoom meeting a few weeks ago. They are using Duracor and Tordon mixed together with some MSO and have real good results with that. So a few new things. And like I talked about a little bit ago with the biocontrol, you know, if we've got some big infestations, we can try to get some bugs started in those areas. Musk thistle, which hopefully a lot of you are familiar with musk thistle and have controlled it in the past. So purple flowered plant thistle, pretty easy to control, spraying in the fall. This year, I think we had folks spraying up into December because the ground wasn't froze yet. So as long as the ground's not froze, you can spray musk thistle in the fall. A lot of good products there. Tordon, Milestone in the fall, Grazon next, Duracor in the spring. So, like I said, just staying after it. Pretty easy plant to control. Just being persistent with it. Canada thistle spreads by underground roots and rhizomes. So you'll see it in a patch out there, growing in a circular patch, not just one individual plant here and there like a musk thistle. So, let's see if I got a picture of it. But anyway, growth spreads by underground roots and rhizomes. So if you happen to be even cultivating out in your field and you still got a piece of that underground root and rhizome on your cultivator, you move to the next field, you could spread it to the next field with your cultivator even. So being aware of it in the pasture situation and roadside, Milestone has been working excellent for us. It's a great product for it. And there's some other products that you can use out of your crop ground to help control it out there. Phragmites is a big issue across the state of Nebraska. Real tall, grassy looking plant. Spreads really, really fast by rhizomes, sets new roots. Those rhizomes can grow a foot a day probably. It's really aggressive. Talk about a little bit here, about how much we spent on the Platte River up there and down in this particular area headed south, the Republican River. They've been doing a lot of work in that area and doing more inspections in the wintertime. Yep, right there, some inspections we do in the wintertime. We can find this stuff, leaves are off the trees, and it just sticks out like a sore thumb out there. This was in a pivot just west of Grand Island. And there's Phragmites growing in the drainage. So some control options in aquatic conditions. We got Habitat, Polaris, Arsenal. Those are the best products. You can use an aquatic glyphosate. It doesn't give you quite the control that the others do, but it works. In dry conditions, we can use Arsenal or glyphosate. And so even in those pivot situations, in those wetland areas, if it's not going anywhere, we can use the Arsenal products. Here's another picture of some along on a bank or a pond situation. Whole big infestation in the river. Purple Loosestrife is another aquatic weed, purple flower. It's a pretty good root system under it. And so we've been fighting that up on the Platte River quite a bit, and some homeowners associations and things. 2,4-D, glyphosate, back to our habitat. Polaris or Arsenal works on that also. Years ago, there's some biocontrol that we have done on that also. That's a leaf feeder. Really defoliates the leaves on it. I had some plots going on the Platte River, but had some floods come through and take some of those situations out. So I haven't progressed any further with any more of those right now. Saltcedar, another aquatic weed. Find it growing kind of out west. There was quite a few acres on Harlan Reservoir, Lake McConaughey. Getting a lot of those under control, but it's still found out west on the Platte River and such. Sericea lespedeza, that's one that's kind of moving up from the south, from Kansas, kind of southeast Nebraska. There are a few other infestations in Nebraska, but a lot of it is in this southern tier counties where we're finding more of it. Pretty aggressive invader. It's a perennial. Lancaster County came across it. Big patch of it. So there are that figure out what you got out there. We find a new invader like this. Plumeless Thistle looks kind of like a musk thistle, only the thorns go a little higher up to the bloom, the blossom, and so thorns go all the way up to the flower. It's very stout taproot, but control options are pretty similar to the musk thistle. And the plumeless thistle was kind of found more in northeast Nebraska. Japanese knotweed, kind of another aquatic weed, likes water also. They're finding it on creeks, some streams in Douglas County in the Omaha, Lincoln area. Also, it's an ornamental plant. There's a few other of these that were ornamental plants also. Purple Loosestrife and Saltcedar. And so you get them to become noxious weeds, and we can stop the sale of them at the nurseries. And so years ago, when we first were getting Saltcedar to become a noxious weed, stopped by a greenhouse in Grand Island there, and they had 6 or 8 of the little Saltcedar plants right there being ready to be sold. So stop the sale of that, and we're able to do that. Giant knotweed, big leaf, grows 8 to 14 foot tall. Another perennial plant, heart-shaped leaf. So one thing about it, we don't have very many acres of that particular weed, the Japanese or giant knotweed. This was in southern Hall County 3 years ago or 4 years ago. Somebody had reported a particular weed along Highway 11 there, so I wanted to check it out. Sure enough, it was knotweed. So out in the middle of nowhere, how did a knotweed plant get started out there? But it got it eradicated and nothing else down the drain there or anything. Spotted and diffuse knapweed. Spotted knapweed's a little more pinkish purple. Diffuse knapweed, a little more of the white flower that are found in northeast Nebraska. Causing a fair amount of damage up there in these pasture situations, but not that hard to control. It's just getting after it and staying after it. So spraying in the fall works real well. The slide's just a few years old, but years ago we started off with about 4 million acres of noxious weeds and 4 noxious weeds. We're down to roughly about 900,000 acres of noxious weeds, and we got 12 of them now. So compliments go out to the landowners for doing a good job on their noxious weeds and getting get things under control. So switching gears just a little bit, some control of some woody species out there. There's a lot of different products out there to use with spraying your trees or doing different things. So, you know, there's the 2,4-Ds. You got some Escort, Milestone, Chaparral, Crossbow, Remedy. You got some Pronon power pellets, spike pellets, cut stump treatments. And so, you know, first of all, you want to identify what tree species you're after. Russian olive, cedar tree, elm trees, locust trees, whatever. You know, find the appropriate product to use. You know, use a good surfactant, follow label directions, and everything. So, you know, there's plenty of products out there to use for these tree species. So, I mean, up in my area, and even down here, you know, the eastern red cedar is a very, seems like a fast invader, but it's kind of a slow invader. It's over the years just kind of creeped in, and maybe you don't notice it right away. And all of a sudden you have acres and acres of eastern red cedar. So there's quite a few tools in your toolbox out there to use for controlling the eastern red cedar. First of all, if you've got a small, you know, a small problem or a big problem, you know, you probably need to evaluate which direction you want to go and what type of control you want to undertake there. So if you want control or you want complete eradication. You know, if you just want to control what you got out there, then maybe just take out the female trees, ones with the little berries on them. You know, maybe you want to leave the other trees for wildlife, habitat, you know, other things, you know, which is be a good deal in some situations. So, you know, just take out those trees. If you're getting a lot of them out there and you want to do some eradication, and or if it's small, let's go that route first. You know, you can use some spray out there in a situation like that. You know, Tordon around. I'll go over these in a little bit, but just 1 mil per foot of tree around the base of the tree of Tordon works pretty well. There's a product called Chaparral. There's Escort and Milestone mixed together. That works pretty well also. Escort works. There's Remedy. And so, you know, these situations here where there's scattered, you can go out and do some spraying. You know, a shovel works pretty well on that too. You know, try to get rid of some of those. So if you've got a large infestation and you bought a pasture or something that's, you know, you've got big issues, well, sometimes you maybe just need to start small and work up, clearing off some flat areas, you know, doing certain things. See what else we got. You know, maybe even the biological control, the goats, you know, if you can use a high stocking rate and get the goats to debark some of them and, you know, raise some of the limbs up, you know, that's an option. In that situation, you know, prescribed fire, you know, it's fairly inexpensive, really good against the small cedar trees. And there are burn associations around to help out in that situation. You know, fairly inexpensive. Well, you do kind of have to leave the pasture set idle for a while in order to burn it the next year. So you have some fuel for that fire. If you go out and graze it down real short, you won't have enough fuel to burn those big cedar trees. And so, you know, you're going to have to, you know, unfortunately, find some pasture somewhere else to let one set idle to do some cedar tree work that year. And I know pasture's hard to find. So it's a tough call, but Cedar trees are tough. So go back here a little bit. So in the mechanical control, you know, we've got all I didn't get pictures of those in there, but you've got all sorts of types of equipment to use. Skid loaders with saws on them, or cutters. Got four-wheelers. Four-wheeler with a cutter on the front of it would work pretty good on trees like that. You know, you start getting to the big trees, the four-wheeler cutters aren't going to work very well. Of course, bulldozers and excavators get to be quite expensive there, but we have to recover some of that ground somewhere along the line to make it productive again. So like I said before, you know, there's pretty good control options out there for cedar trees with herbicides. It's just a matter of getting the proper one, you know, at the particular time. There has been studies done in the past on some school lands with aerial flights of high rates of like Grazon P+D or Tordon. And that the only problem with aerial spraying, they're only putting on 2-3 gallons. And so when the plane comes through, it only gets basically one side of the tree. You're not getting full coverage on the other side of the tree. So it really didn't work out very well. Now, in a situation like that, if you've got your own sprayer or floater and you can maybe get on 20 gallons to the acre, you might do okay on some of those trees. You might get decent enough coverage. You just have to watch out with a few of the products. You might burn the grass in certain situations. So, because you are using a fairly high rate of like Grazon P+D or Tordon or Escort or something like that. So sometimes maybe just individual treatment of those plants and getting coverage with a good surfactant will work pretty good. As I said, there's a Pronon power pellets. Come in a little can, and you put just on small trees, you know, a couple pellets per tree. Let the rain take it in. Bigger trees, of course, you're going to use 4 or 5 pellets. So that's a nice thing to have in the pickup, you know, and throw a few pellets under a few trees when you're out checking cows or something like that. Spike pellets is another way of also doing that. So anyway, this is in northern Howard County here. You know, they're starting to get some infestations there. Basically, what I was taking a picture of is some musk thistle problems here in the foreground. So, but as I can tell, they're not taking very good care of their musk thistles, and the cedar trees are eventually going to get bigger and bigger and take over. So they're eventually going to have some issues with that. And this is the same pasture, just a little ways down the road, and the musk thistle situation around there is pretty extensive, with the cedar trees coming on in the background. So getting some issues and not doing much control on either one of them, which they did do some control on the musk thistle this fall. A little bit at a time. Just keep working at it. And eventually you'll have some clean pastures. Just a little word here on this one up here. It's just another pasture of musk thistle I had to take a photo of too. So they got their thistle sprayed also. So anyway, when you're out cutting some other trees, you know, you're just elm trees in the fence line or wherever it might be, you know, there's some cut stump treatments out there. Pathway, Tordon RTU, crossbow or garland. Cut them off, treat the stump, and you won't have to come back and retreat that, cut that tree back down again in 5 years. And so the Tordon RTU comes in little quart containers, real easy to carry around, treat the stump, and move on to the next one. So anyway, just a brief update on some weed management areas in Nebraska. Back in early 2000s, we started developing some weed management areas and kind of to address certain invasive weeds, certain situations in particular, basically drainage areas, basins. And so some of you might be aware of the Twin Valley weed management area down here, working on the Republican River, trying to alleviate some flooding issues, getting more water to Kansas, that type of thing. So last Tuesday, we did some testifying in Lincoln at a hearing, and so they have allocated $1 million a year for Nebraska rivers and streams. Senator Hughes is introducing the bill to increase it to $3 million a year. And so we went down and testified at that. And over the years, I'm just going to say down here in the Twin Valley weed management area, Kansas was suing us for $72 million years ago with the work that had been done on the Republican River and things like that. So they increased the CFS from 300 to over 1,000. We got the water to Kansas, and they reduced that 72 million down to $5 million. And so that was kind of a huge deal. So just trying to keep the river systems open for flow conveyance and help out the flooding issues. I work a lot in the Platte River, Platte Valley weed management area from Columbus to Lake McConaughey. We do a lot of helicopter spraying out there and airboat spraying, drone spraying, basically for Phragmites issues, some other things along the way. So the weed management areas, just a group of public and private agencies and individuals who are concerned with stopping the spread of noxious and invasive plants located in the central Platte River area, which would be in the Twin Valley weed management area or any of the weed management areas. So we basically just, facilitate cooperation and coordination among land managers, landowners, identify and manage noxious and invasive plants along our central Platte Valley. We develop education programs to further the efforts. We identify funding resources to help us get control of these noxious and invasive plants. And since 2008, our weed management area has spent, I didn't update that one, but it's probably about $7.5 million now. We spend $500,600,000 a year on the Platte River for consistent upkeep on the river system, just to keep it up and flowing good. These numbers are pretty hard to see, but we get shape files from the helicopter, and it tells us exactly where they sprayed and how many acres they sprayed. So in Hall County, I get these for Hall County, of course. In 2021, sprayed 168 acres with the helicopter in Hall County this year. So, and overall, we sprayed about 4,500 acres in Hall County, just with the helicopter. That's not an airboat or the drone either, which the drone only sprayed 10 or 20 last year for me, so it wasn't bad. But, so yeah, we get updated numbers on that all the time. Yes, there's those numbers. Hull County, about a little over $600,000 coming into Hull County from the helicopter spray. And like I said, this has to do with the Platte Valley Weed Management Area. These counties down here along the Republican River are in the so-called same boat we are. You know, they're doing a lot of removal, a lot of spraying, a lot of working with landowners to get the river clear and free of vegetation. So one of our other invasives is Scotch thistle up there in kind of northern Howard County is where I'm seeing it. Very big thistle, huge. Takes over, you know, a lot of ground. It's not a noxious weed or anything, so work with landowners to try to get their infestations controlled. We're fighting yellow flag iris on the Loop River system and across the state of Nebraska, really. Finding a little bit more of it on the Platte River. There's some out on some power districts canals out in western Nebraska. Got a few homeowners associations with it in Grand Island around their ponds there in Grand Island. So something to be aware of. But what we're fighting there. So noxious and invasive weeds can negatively alter water systems, wildlife, and habitat recreation forever. Left unchecked, it will limit the uses on lands for now and for future generations. The longer we ignore them, the more expensive they'll become to eradicate. So like I said before, there's a wide variety of herbicides out there to use, and herbicides aren't the only measure to control your noxious weeds or invasive weeds or cedar trees. It's just, you know, it's what we use sometimes and everything, but just make sure you identify what you're after, and then you'll be able to choose the proper herbicide to go after that particular weed. Follow the label directions. You know, if you're spraying dandelions in your yard, you're probably not going to use Tordon, which would probably work pretty good, but probably not labeled for lawns. So anyway, you're going to use a 2,4-D banjo product or such that's labeled for your lawn. So you put the proper effort in, and you can have some pasture that's free and clean of trees and weeds, and being productive for your animals that you raise. Like I said, there's a wide variety of control measures, spraying, removal. And prescribed contact information. If anybody ever has any questions, feel free to contact your local weed control superintendent, Greg Shuck here in Clay County. Tried to call him this morning, left a couple messages, and hoping he was going to be able to be here, but get a hold of him. And so with that is all I have, and I would entertain any questions if they had any. There are different herbicides in there. Yeah. Basically about the same. Yes. Yeah. The question was the spike power pellets and the pronon power pellets. They're just different herbicides or chemicals in there that work about the same. Yes, sir.
You said that Tordon 22K works on land on trees.
Yeah. Yes. The question was if you're out spraying thistles with your Tordon, can you just spray your cedar trees while you're there? And yes, you can go ahead and do that. Just get good coverage on your trees. You're going to need to soak them down just a little bit more because your percent volume is probably a little lower, you know, for spraying pastures versus spraying the cedar trees. But yeah, when I'm out spraying, you know, in the 4-wheeler or something, I'll just, if there's a cedar tree in the fence line, I'll soak it down, and I can always tell next year when I don't get very good coverage or something, I'll still have a little bit of it growing. So, but at least it sure hurted anyway. So. Any issues with common mullet? And yes, there are some issues out there. That's becoming a little bit of an invader in some particular areas. You know, spraying in the late fall, just when they're seedlings, of course, like the musk thistle. But it's nice to use a product with metsulfuron in it, or escort, like Chaparral has Milestone and escort in it. And also you have to use a little higher rate of surfactant because of the hairy leaf that it has. And so we'll higher rate of surfactant to get through that hairy leaf. We did rent a pasture a number of years ago. There was a few musk thistles out there, and it was just a whole lot of common mullet. So yeah, that's what I spent my time spraying in that pasture, was common mullet. Did some fall spraying one year, and could tell right where I sprayed. Looked real nice. So. Anything else? The question is the landowner responsible for control of the noxious weeds? And yes, it states in the state law that the landowner is responsible to control the noxious weeds. And so when I send an inspection notice on musk thistle, I send it to the landowner. You know, it could be in Florida or Texas, or, you know, it could be just right down the street, but it is to the landowner. Some landowners like to try to put it in their contract that it is the tenant's responsibility. Well, you know, that's not fair to the tenant either. Sometimes I've had a few situations where they have had almost hundreds of acres of musk thistle. Well, I said, that's not fair to the tenant to make them have to, you know, why don't you cost share with them or do something to help them out? Oh no, it's the tenant's in the contract. It's the tenant's responsibility. You know, it's the landowner's responsibility. Well, I did get him talked into doing some fall spraying or helping them out, you know, helping the tenant out a little bit, but he was trying to pawn it off on the tenant. Yeah, spraying along the river system for Phragmites and the other invasive weeds. First of all, the products that we use are aquatically labeled. Arsenal, Habitat, Polaris, those are all aquatically labeled. It is the landowner's responsibility. In our situation, we are getting some grants to assist in spraying, you know, the Phragmites through our Platte Valley weed management area. We do have a cost share program going on also, that we would give the landowner some cost share herbicide. They would apply it. Now down in the lower Platte, from Columbus on down east, they have a cost share program, and that's pretty extensive. They come in and spray, they send I don't know what it is, half of the bill to the landowner. So their cost share program is a little bit different than ours.
That cost share problem, that just apply to the owner or to the land with someone?
The tenant, I mean, the tenant can get some of that cost share herbicide, but it's got to be used on the river system, on the Phragmites.
Any other like
No, there's no other cost share programs here in the state of Nebraska on any other noxious weeds. It would be just for that Phragmites in the river situation. I wish there was other cost share programs for, yeah, for other noxious weeds, but we just don't have that. I'll be around. I'll stay for lunch, and so if you have any other questions, feel free to get a hold of me, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh,
Nope, you're good. Okay, so we are a little bit ahead of schedule, so we're gonna set up for lunch here pretty soon. So we'll have kind of a little bit of an early lunch, and then we'll get rolling back with our afternoon program. So those of you on Zoom, I would probably plan on about a 35 to 40 minute break, and then we'll come back.